It was the best of times. It was the worst of times because we also had challenges getting rounds of funding and looking like we were busy and trying to get our new products to market. So this is where the drop-in CEO was born, because we were having challenges and they dropped in a CEO named Mike. And he saw the challenges that I and the director of operations were having. And he rolled up his sleeves. He did the work with us. He elevated our skills and we got back on track. And then when we needed to go IPO, they pulled him out and dropped in another CEO and team that had the skills. I forever remember how he made me feel. When I was interviewed about 6 years ago, they asked me, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm like the drop-in CEO. I drop into businesses and partner with the C-suite leaders to help them navigate a particular challenge. But we also elevate the people for lasting impact. And then you pull me out when you don't need me anymore."
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Deb Coviello. Deb is a speaker, author, podcaster, fractional leader, coach, consultant, and professional moderator. She is known as the Drop-In CEO, teaching C-suite leaders how to establish a lift, light, lead environment and create calm amidst chaos or crisis. She is the author of The CEO's Compass, Your Guide to Get Back on Track, and the new CEO Playbook, Stop Chasing Results and Start Pursuing Peace of Mind. Her long-running podcast, The Drop-In CEO, is in the top 1.5% among all Apple Podcasts. You can learn more about Deb at dropinceo.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Deb.
Deb, welcome to the Corporate Couch this afternoon.
Oh, Jeff, it's an honor. Can't wait to have this conversation and hopefully bring a little value to your audience.
Oh my God, you're going to bring, what a quality career you've had. And now you're the drop-in CEO, and you have a whole branding around that, which I love and we'll talk about. But, you're a published author, you have your own podcast. I didn't go back. I know it's 460 plus episodes.
Yeah, we dropped the first episode February 2020, and you can't keep me quiet since.
Yeah, no, you're great. And what a great voice, too.
Well, thank you. And where do I send the check to?
I think, Brian Petro, who I met through my work with Exec HQ, introduced us on LinkedIn, and we had a Zoom call to get to know one another. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a fun conversation. I'm very excited. So, but let's start with a really fun question. What, even people that know you fairly well, Deb, what one thing would surprise them about you?
Oh, well, this I don't talk about too often, but if you know anything about amateur radio, ham radio, at the age of 8, I was able to pass the test, and I had my basic amateur radio license at age 8. I knew Morse code, and probably one of the youngest ones around. So that's a fun fact. And so since then, if you want, I can communicate to you in Morse code if that's of any value.
Wow, that you're definitely a first out of my 115-ish guests to date. So that's incredible. I thought you might want to mention, even though it is on your LinkedIn headline, about you were a silver medalist curler, so
Yeah.
that's phenomenal.
So yeah, let's go there. I am a bit unique in that area, depending on what part of the US you're in or wherever you're listening to. Curling is not often known, or it's called that sport or that thing that you see on the Olympics, where yes, I do throw stones on ice, I sweep and get to yell at people. But in 2017, I was playing in the Arena Nationals at Notre Dame University, and we won the silver medal that year. And yeah, that same organization actually prepares high performance teams to go to the Olympics. So, will I ever go to the Olympics? That's a bit of a long shot, but I got that silver medal in the background over here to
Oh,
show
there you
for
go.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah. I'm so intrigued with curling when the Winter Olympics are on, you'll be somewhere, and it's nonstop. If you're at a sports bar, they got everything on. And I'm just so intrigued with it. It's so interesting. Did you do that as a child?
No, but I started midlife when I realized I needed a life. My, we raised three kids in New Jersey. I've been married over 36 years. And back in the day, all it was work and kids, work and kids. And
Right.
I had returned to the workforce after my third kid. My boss was a curler, and she said one day, "Do you want to try curling?" And about a year after my husband started, because I was busy trying to get that first child into college, so I had no bandwidth. But then I tried curling, and it just was one of those sports that you could start at any age.
Yeah.
I remember playing on a team where we had an 18-year-old and an 82-year-old. It's like golf. You can learn the sport in 10 minutes to an hour, and then it becomes a lifetime to perfect. I'm still trying to perfect the sport, but it's also just wonderful because
Yeah.
there's such a social aspect. You can drink on the ice, off the ice, and there's just this wonderful community. So, love the
Yeah.
sport, and would love to share more for anybody that's interested in the sport of curling.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the drinking aspects, like bowling. Like every time you bowl, you have to have a pitcher of beer or something, right?
Yeah, but I'll
Um,
I'll tell you a quick story though. Up until about a year or so ago, any captain of a team can kind of get in their head. And there was one competition I was in their head, and my vice skip came up to me and says, "Here's some bourbon." And so we put a bit of bourbon on each end of the ice, and I'll tell you from that point on, we started winning. So it definitely can be part of the strategy, alcohol.
I love it. I love it. So, where did you grow up, and what was fun for you growing up?
Oh, okay. Well, dating myself, but kind of grew up in the 70s. Home for me was New Providence, New Jersey. So if you know Jersey, that's around exit 142 off the Garden State Parkway. And it was a great time. I mean, kids were fearless back then. I used to walk to school, ride my bike everywhere, leave the house at 9 in the morning and not be seen until dinner time. So spent all of my childhood years there from 5 to 17 until I went off to college. And what was fun? I don't know, carefree days and having a paper route and having lots of friends and playing Ghost in the Graveyard. Those are some of the things that I remember from
Ghost in the
back then.
Graveyard, love it. Yeah, I mean, we're in kind of the same age demographic, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a fun period, and yeah, you had a lot more flexibility, from your parents than my, at least my parenting style.
Yeah, I mean, there
We-
was no fear back then. I mean,
right.
and again, I talk about this on my podcast, kids jumping out of trees, it was just the sky's the limit. And it was a good childhood. I mean, my parents supported me both in academics and in all of the arts, a little bit of sports in there. So it was good. It was a tough childhood as well. Family was not perfect, but I don't think any family is really perfect. But
Yeah.
overall, had a solid upbringing that set me up for the future.
Yeah, no, I love that. Did you have aspirations as a child? Hey, when I'm an adult, I'm going to be this.
No. All I knew was, again, who really knows what they want to be? Maybe a couple people are fortunate, but as a child, and this is part of some of my backstory, I was very creative. I mean, I could draw, I could paint, I could sing, I could write, dance. act, the whole bit. And the family actually thought I was going to go into communications and journalism. I truly was really good in the arts. Now, I was good all the way around. I was actually gifted. I mean, I was bored in school. They used to jump me to the next grade for math and science or English just to be challenged and keep me focused, but very much into the arts. And along the way, I just can't define the moment. I started getting bored in school around fifth grade. My grades started sliding. And I don't know what happened, but they said, let's skip her a grade. So I skipped the fifth grade. I was only there for about a month and went to middle school and was academically challenged for the first time. But somewhere in there, I lost my confidence in the arts. I was no longer meeting expectation. And I flipped over to science and math, which became kind of my key to success through high school. It's really interesting, but the education system may do to people if you don't do exactly what they expect or meet a particular standard, or maybe you're talking at a turn when they want you to conform and sit,
Right.
can do a disservice. So I still claim to be a creative, but didn't know what I wanted to be. It really wasn't until college that I figured that out.
I was going to talk about what you do today and have been doing since the 2018, 2019 timeframe, but I could definitely see your creative side and everything you do, your
Mhm.
podcast, your website, your books, your YouTube channel. So yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, the creative part is just really what I love. I may have gone into the sciences and gone into the engineering field. It's problem solving, it's technical, but if you have to step back and look at it, it's about taking a palette of tools, a palette of colors, and figuring out what treatment you want to give it to get a particular outcome. So it is still very creative, even though I practice in the area of technology.
I always ask people about their major, and yours
Yeah.
is very interesting. And I always ask, so you graduated from RPI. I should be able to pronounce this because I grew up in New York
Okay.
State too. Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI.
Yeah.
That's it, affectionately known. But you were a biomechanical engineer. That was your degree, a BS there. Was that your original major? And if it wasn't, what was your original major and why'd you switch?
Yeah. So that's an interesting story too. So again, I was a biology geek. I used to take tests in high school for competitions. Go figure. I went to college. Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute is another version of it, or the toot.
The dude.
And I started as a biology major, thinking maybe I'd go to med school. And it was an interesting time. Um, I was no longer the smartest person. I was lucky to get a C in a lot of my classes, so
Yeah.
it was busting my chops. And I realized very quickly early on, I said, I don't think I want to go to medical school. And by the way, the parents were only paying for 4 years of education. So I was fortunate, and engineering is a big part of Rensselaer. So I switched over to biomedical engineering. So again, I didn't lose any time, had the same basic courses, but oh my, a
Right.
challenging to be in engineering. Had to bust my chops for the first time. Um, and then I had another interesting transition point. So as you move through your basic engineering courses, and I got to my junior and senior year. Now, on one side, I had some wonderful manufacturing classes that absolutely turned me on. Like, this is cool. I can go into that. But then on the flip side, in our senior year, we were doing experiments on animals where we had to evaluate the physiology and do certain experiments to these dogs. They were under the care of a vet, and we were working on them. I couldn't stomach it. I couldn't stomach what we were doing, and I would be that lab student over by the equipment while my lab partner was
Right.
actually working with the animal, and you can only envision what eventually happened to that animal. I got sick to my stomach. Now, I started biomedical engineering, but I realized I don't think this is where I want to stay. And so I was also concurrently loving my manufacturing lab, where back in the day, and this is dating me, some of the experiments were using a robotic arm, programming it in XYZ, geeking out here, using Fortran or BASIC programming language. And it
Yeah.
was just so cool creating an outcome from nothing. And so I got really turned on to this concept of creating something for nothing. And in my senior year, I decided I'm not going to grad school. I'm not going to medical school. I'm going into manufacturing. And that was probably the best decision to apply my technical expertise, but also the creative side. And it was good because everybody else didn't get a job in biomedical engineering. They needed to go on for their master's or PhD.
Right.
So that was one pivot point that I make, but I don't regret it. Manufacturing has served me quite well over the years.
I always like to ask people how they got their first job out of college because it's such a crazy, stressful, anxiety ridden process, even today for 22 or 23 or 24-year olds, whatever. But talk about your process there.
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute had a robust counseling system. So they helped us with our resumes. They did all of that interview prep. Again, dating myself. Back in the day, when I graduated in the mid 80s, industry was booming. Graduates were getting multiple job offers. I got about 5 job offers out of it, both in my fall semester and in my spring semester senior
Right.
year. So
Yeah.
I actually had choices, which unfortunately some of the graduates today, depending on the industry, just don't afford that particular option of having choices. So I could have gone to Goodyear Tire and Rubber. I could have gone to a naval company out in Connecticut, but ultimately I got 2 job offers from a Raytheon company, which is a defense company up in the New England area and all over the place. One was in product engineering, and the other one was in their manufacturing management development program, which afforded me the opportunity to be schooled and trained in management, but also do 4 6-month rotations in different areas of manufacturing. While it started out as a lower salary than going into product engineering, every 6 months I got a raise. So by the time I was done with the 2-year program, with all of this training and mentorship, I was ready for management and I had an equivalent salary to what the other one was. So
Yeah.
anybody can get into a manufacturing management development program, highly encourage it. And that was the beginning of me recognizing myself as a leader by getting into that program.
Yeah, very interesting. So it looks like, I mean, I'm not going to go through the various jobs, but talk about your career progression, kind of like on the corporate America side. So it looks like from, when you graduated all the way up to you started the drop-in CEO, kind of what were some key moments in your career there? Looked like you worked for a startup, you did all this green belt, training 200 plus people. But talk about your pivotal moments as well as did you have any mentors, whether they were, people that you interacted with, managers or books or what was your kind of leadership development process?
So, this is an interesting part of my backstory when it comes to leadership. And I'll talk about the leadership lessons along the way, where I don't think I ever had a mentor. I picked up nuggets of wisdom along the way, but no real mentor for any long stay. And it could be that I was of the generation, I can do it myself and may not have been looking for a mentor or coach. But really, I didn't see that support system as I now see it should be for anybody that's in your care and you're trying to elevate them. So, a quick scan of my career. Again, I said I started out with Raytheon Company in New England. I recognized that after I finished that program of process engineering, quality supervision, and supply chain, I fell in love with quality because there was a compliance element, auditing, quality control, root cause analysis. I fell in love with that. So coming out of the manufacturing program, I knew that I wanted the quality space. A pivotal moment for me was when we decided to move from New England back home to New Jersey. And I know you and I could talk a lot about New Jersey. That was home for us. So we were missing home. And what happened was my husband was going to be taking or getting involved back in his father's business, painting and decorating. He was third generation. And I knew that I was the key to getting us back home. So I took any job I could get. It's not on my LinkedIn profile, but I worked for a company called Seton Leather for about 5 months and they needed a quality person, but it was a tough industry, very different from the electronics manufacturing industry and the strict standards of being in a military type environment to something that was very creative when you're dealing with chemical processes and leather and natural products. I couldn't apply the same set of rules for making good
Interesting.
quality decisions. And so I had no coaching. And after 5 months, you get the line, it's not working out. So I found myself after 5 months, we moved in with my husband's parents. I didn't have a job. And that was one of the things that we really relied on. So after that, I realized I better not just take any job, but one that really fits my area of expertise. So that was like one pivotal point. Another pivotal point was then I got a job. I worked there for 3 years in electronics manufacturing, and I was a quality supervisor. One day I thought, hey, the quality manager position was open. I interviewed for it, and the new guy who came in after me wound up getting the job. And I wondered why I didn't get the job. And you know what? I never got a good answer. They just said they had more experience. But back then, I was probably in my early 30s. Nobody talked to me about politics. Nobody talked about working with advocates and making sure that I knew exactly what I needed to do to be ready for the next role. It was more about heads down, do my work, and expect a raise or expect that promotion. That didn't happen. So I learned after that lesson that I need to know who are the decision makers to stay aligned with them. And again, school of hard knocks, no mentorship.
You think that was part of, you're probably one of the few females in a male dominated manufacturing QA industry?
So I'm glad you bring that up. It is a statement of fact that I was one of very few females engineer manufacturing. I don't take that as an advantage or disadvantage because it just doesn't matter. I worked hard. I may just not have known to ask certain questions about my career progression. I may have only had managers versus leaders, and leaders invest in their people and tell them what they need to do or have those career discussions to get you ahead. Well, anyway, fast forward. I had my second child while I was there, had a great 3 years, and then knock, knock, knock. I got a knock on my door and says, guess what? We would love to have you as a quality engineer at our joint venture, Lucent Technologies and Philips Electronics from Europe. This is going to be a joint venture. We want you to join us. And so I joined Philips Consumer Communications and really, really, really built up my quality engineering skills. The problem with that job is after 18 months, they said, the joint venture is not working, but we will give you 60 days on our dime to find a new job. So lesson learned, even if it wasn't the right environment, I learned everything that I could. I learned so many things in the area of quality engineering. But the thing I learned from that is, you should always have a plan B. You should always be networking. I was fortunate to find another job pretty soon once they said go find a new job. But my advice for others is you should always be networking because you just never know what looks like a good thing. They can pull
Right.
the plug on you.
Yeah, because shit happens for sure. I've been in involuntary transition about 9 times in my career. It came to a point like if I go to a company or a division of a company, something's going to happen. And it has no bearing on what value I brought, how much money I made the company, how many, leaders I developed or whatever. It's just, yeah, so I always tell people like, I like the side gig, the gig economy. And I tell recent college graduates, it's great that you want to work for a company, but I would always pursue something on the side. If is my advice. Your mileage may vary because, to put all your, financial resources on a company that could go out of business, could get bought, the stuff that happens. So, yeah,
As we said, shit happens.
so I love your advice there.
Yeah, so I'm going to just keep going because this next opportunity, I found my way into a startup optical networking company where I was employee 60. And I came in as the quality manager, electronics manufacturing. That was my niche. I had the opportunity to build an organization, wear multiple hats. And it was the best of times, it was the worst of times because we also had challenges getting rounds of funding and looking like we were busy and trying to get our new products to market. So this is where the drop-in CEO was born because we were having challenges and they dropped in a CEO named Mike. And he saw the challenges that I and the director of operations were having. And he rolled up his sleeves. He did the work with us. He elevated our skills and we got back on track. And then when we needed to go IPO, They pulled him out and dropped in another CEO and team that had the skills. I forever remember how he made me feel. And so I'll fast forward a little bit. When I was interviewed about 6 years ago, they asked me, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm like the drop in CEO. I drop into businesses and partner with the C suite leaders to help them navigate a particular challenge. But we also elevate the people for lasting impact. And then you pull me out and you don't need me anymore." That was the origin story for the current brand that I have now. And so that was one of the most positive experiences, but it was also the worst of times because the company grew to about 5 or 600. We did go IPO. It was a thrill. I had stock options. I was 5 months pregnant. I thought we were going to be rich and retire very, very early. But what happened was, as I was growing, I'd also been promoted to the director of quality, growing this organization. And I was making mistakes along the way, but my new manager never would meet with me and tell me what I was doing wrong or coach me for improvement. I got a couple indicators here and there that I didn't do well, but never those conversations for improvement. And one day they had the conversation. It's not working out. I got a wonderful severance package. I was able to ride out my third pregnancy at home and thought I'd be rich and end my career there. Well, the company went belly up like all the dot coms back in the early 90s. My options were no longer worth much. I got a wonderful 9-month break to stay home and be with my 3 children. But at the same time, I said, oh, so much responsibility, so much tension. I was 35 years old. I said, when I go back to work, I just want to be an individual contributor. So I no longer wanted burnout. I wanted a little bit of balance in my life.
Right.
So that was a really big pivotal point for me. So again, if you're let go from a job, don't let it define you, but what can you learn from that exit? And what do you want to do differently going forward?
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, I love the startup world. I was in Sprint, now T-Mobile, when Sprint was only about 18 months old. They had Sprint also did I don't know if it was a joint venture with Sprint PCS. Sprint owned 40% of the company, and then TCI, Cox, and Comcast Cable owned the other 60% at 20% each. I was employee 55 there. I was at Aratana Therapeutics recently, a startup animal health drug manufacturer, and so it's a crazy world, and you think things are going to happen. I was at Navient when in the .com boom and bust, thinking I'm going to get rich and all that good stuff. So I could definitely empathize with you in terms of your experience there. And it's just, and you talk about leaders or really managers, right? And I think companies just throw people, and they could be great individual contributors, and they say, oh, we give you a promotion because you want to get more money, and that means a manager. I think that's less so now. I think you can be a IC, individual contributor, and still get promoted and get the money you deserve. It's more common, but they don't train teach them how to be leaders. You manage process, you lead people, right?
Yeah. So a couple other lessons out of that is, and that's really one of the reasons why I do what I do. I was a struggling early, mid-career professional without a support system. So, my podcast, my book, everything I'm doing also is to educate and help not only the individuals who don't have a support system to leverage these tips, these tricks, these insights that I have learned along the way so that they don't have to struggle as much, but they're also lessons to CEOs and C-suite leaders that, are you investing in your people to develop these skills? Because if not, they're going to lose their confidence and there's this trickle down effect. So I'm also trying to educate them that even if you don't have the capacity to do it, then look outside for help. The other lesson learned is when your spouse or significant other says sell the stock early, I might want to listen to that. So when you get stock tips, listen to them. They might make some sense. I might have been in a better position. So made a little bit of money, didn't get rich, but had to go back to work after Telium.
So at what point did you decide to kind of spin out of I'll say this: security of corporate America, and start the drop-in CEO. And it really, when I look at it again, and you're going to obviously fill in the blanks, but it's amazing to me, just if you look at your LinkedIn and just see the progression. I mean, I think your last kind of maybe corporate job where you're head of quality assurance for North America, obviously a big responsibility. But then around the 2018, 2019 timeframe, the drop-in CEO, is born from that experience you had at the startup. So talk about it.
Yeah, Jeff, I really appreciate this, but basically, the pivotal point for me was again when I got kicked out of Tellium, thought I'd be rich. When I had to go back to work, I re-entered the workforce in a completely different industry. So I went back into the chemical industry, and what was really cool about this was specifically the fragrance industry, things that go into perfume, laundry detergent, etc. They specifically wanted somebody not from the industry, which was a blessing because so often industries get very incestuous and the people just do the rotation. I had transferable skills. So I did the corporate thing in that environment for 9 years, honing my skills in quality, in ISO 9001, quality systems, auditing, root cause analysis. That's where I got my Six Sigma black belt and my various certifications. And then I hit a ceiling or a wall or a box or whatever, and knew that I was ready to help an organization on a grander scale, not just an individual contributor at a single site. So, in pursuit of that, I couldn't get it through the company that I was at. And I had conversations with my leadership. At the same time, knock, 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 got a knock on the door. Givaudan, which was the global #1 company in the same industry, said, "We'd like to hire you." And so I told my boss I'd love to help him transition. It was amicable. Then I noticed 4 hours later, they said, "Deb, we got to walk you out because you're going to the competition." So what would have been like a 2-week on site, they walked me out. I went into a corporate role again as an individual contributor, but I was in an environment that leveraged my expertise. And then in 2013, since I'd been in and out of Cincinnati, Ohio so much, out of the corporate headquarters, I got a promotion to be the head of operational excellence, a close cousin to quality. So that's where you help with operational efficiency. So I had to build an organization, go from $500,000 cost savings to get up to 5 million annually, build an organization, partner with leadership. And it was in that process of not only that role, but then getting nominated to be the head of quality. Something was happening in me that I realized I'm no longer the smartest person. In that corporate role, I realized I had a bunch of subject matter experts. I had to remove their barriers so they could help amplify what we were doing. Another leadership lesson. And I also had to change my style in order to resonate with leaders, plant managers, because they have so much they have to handle. So I started learning influence skills of what do I need to do to help them, for them to help me get through things. Anyway, long story short, my leadership style really started developing at that point, to the point where one, we elevated the region. It was #4 and we got it to #2. Nothing better than going from last place to being competitive in second place in 18 months based on changes in my style. But I was changing so much as a person, I no longer fit in. I started talking about reflective leadership and how do I want to lead differently. And my leadership didn't really care about that. They says, "Okay, that's nice, Deb, that you're talking about changing your mindset and everything." I said, "But what results are you going to get from me? And what projects are you going to do to get us there?" I was no longer scribbling within the lines. I was outside of the lines. And long story short, I got kicked out of the nest about, I don't know, 9 to 12 months later. Lots of little stories that led up to it, but it was the pivotal point that I knew I no longer fit. I was getting burnt out. I knew I was doing the right things, but I said to my husband, something's got to change. And I didn't know what it was, but I just said, something's got to change. And change happened to me. But it was the best thing that ever happened because it finally gave me that pause in my career to look back at what my value was and what then did I want to do next, knowing that I still had value to give, and figure out what market did I want to go after and consult. And with that, I started my own business in December of 2018.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts, he creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
Had you given it any thought prior to the exit, or you just said,
No
you
way.
got shown the door and it's like, okay, I'm done with corporate America. I know
Yeah,
I can
let's go
help.
there.
Yeah.
Well, so let's go there.
Yeah.
3 days after I got kicked out, I wound up having a job interview with a company. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go back to big corporate. But I put my happy face on. I put my professional face on, and I gave that job interview. The director of quality at another flavors manufacturing quality. And at the end of the day, I didn't get the job. And I said, okay, that's okay. And about a month later, I had another interview for a quality position in the flavor industry, and I didn't get that job interview either. Maybe I was sending off the wrong vibes, but I just said, I don't want to go back to corporate. I was running away from it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was trying to figure out what was I running towards. And again, it was that autonomy, the belief in myself that I could do the same work for people that really valued, and I didn't have to fit in a box anymore. I could pick and choose the assignments I want. Anyway, one of the interesting stories was that second job interview where I couldn't check the box on everything they were looking for, but what was a 2-hour interview wound up being 4 hours. Fast forward after I made the offer. Until you find the right person, let me be an interim leader for you. And when you find the right person, take me out. Well, 6 months later, that was one of my 3 gigs I got within the first 6 months. They couldn't find a replacement and they were getting stressed. So they hired me as a contractor. So that was really the beginning of the fractional life. But again, it was about running away from corporate. I didn't fit anymore. There's nothing wrong with it. I had so much education, so many experiences, opportunities to travel and grow. But I'll tell you, I've been growing by leaps and bounds, far more for which people look at me and say, we can't believe how you've transformed from that corporate environment.
Yeah, no, it's such a great story. So, I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of different things that what you're doing, but just as I obviously love podcasting, that's why I have my own. But to I know what I have learned interviewing, and I haven't. I've done 25% of the number of episodes you have, but what kind of was your big learnings doing podcasts, and any ahas in terms of interviewing so many different people and that? So talk about that.
So I appreciate that, Jeff, because it has been part of me rediscovering who I once was as a creative. As you can hear, I've got a pretty good voice. I also have a knack for deep listening. So when I interview somebody, I can hear their story and reframe it in a way like solving a problem on what I heard and even evolve it. I found I had this knack for volleying conversation to create an experience and no longer just a transaction. So anyway, when I first started, I saw on LinkedIn people looking for people to be interviewed. I said, "Oh, I want to be interviewed." I raised my hand and I had such a wonderful experience the first time I was interviewed. And oh my, have I evolved since then. I started pursuing being a guest. And I said, I really, really love this forum to be interviewed and share my stories. And returning to my talkative self as a kid, because I didn't tell you about being a child and being so talkative. The teachers told my parents, can you do something to control her? Because I was a closet. Maybe I was an extrovert. And maybe I still am. I just control it a little bit. But along the way, I said, I want to do a podcast. And so it was that Mario Pareca who interviewed me, where I said, I'm kind of like the drop-in CEO. He obviously had an angle because he's a podcast company. He said, you should have your own podcast. And we were going back and forth. And he says, the drop-in CEO is brilliant. I said, you should own that. And I never really owned it until we started talking about the podcast. And then I realized the name of the podcast is the Drop-in CEO. So I got into it. I said, I want to do this. I just felt it was the right thing to do. And about uh, the day before I actually recorded my first interview, my first solo, I almost didn't push the button. And somebody came into my life that I had spoken to, and she says, what's holding you back? And I said, myself. I didn't think I was good enough, or what did I have something worthwhile saying? But after our conversation and pep talk, I pushed the button and recorded the first episode. What I learned about this along the way was I loved interviewing people. So it was the wild, wild west in the beginning. I'll interview anybody from any walk of life. And then as any business owner realized, Deb, you need a strategy. Why are you doing this? What do you hope to be the outcome of all these conversations? So out of that, long story short, there's a couple reasons why I do it. One, I love the creative element. I love meeting new people. I love the chemistry that we can build and bring those experiences to whoever is listening. The listeners benefit. It is all for the listeners to educate and inspire them by the conversations we're having. But even fast forward, it's more about building strategic alliances with people. Again, you and I met, we were introduced through the network. We got to know each other. We found value in the conversation, doing podcast swaps. It's all part of this building community, because when you're in corporate, you have a very small community. When you're out on the outside, I had to build this huge network. Thankfully, after about 470 episodes, some of them were solo episodes, so I don't mind talking to myself. I now have this amazing network that if you said, Jeff, Deb, do you know anybody in this area? I might say, wait, let me go through my Rolodex, if people still remember what a Rolodex is, but go through my podcast. I said, I have somebody. And this is how we build rapport, we build relationships, and we help those that are on the outside of corporate, but we can also be a valuable resource for inside. So it has fed my soul. It serves a networking and a business development perspective. I interview a lot of CEOs because I want to serve them, but it's also building brand credibility. People know me before they actually meet me because they hear my voice. So I may have gone all over the place, but it started from a place of joy and wanting to do something to creative. And now it actually serves a greater purpose of helping more people than I could even imagine, you know?
We've had such a similar journey
Yeah.
because I was I started my career as a software engineer, computer programmer
Hmm.
at AT&T, and I was good at math, wasn't brilliant at math, but I was really good GPA, you know, was a above average programmer, but I've always been more I love the creative side, so even though I've led analytics teams and built regression models and predictive modeling and all that good
Over my
stuff.
head.
Yeah, well, yeah, Miss biomedical engineering, but anyhow, and yeah, so I just love the process, and I totally get the podcast, like, not pushing it. I mean, literally, I had the idea for 5 years. I love
Really?
Tim Ferriss. I read, 4 Hour Work Week, The 4 Hour Body. I was a big fan. He launched his podcast in 2014. I fell in love with the medium, but I went through Seth Godin's podcasting workshop in 2018 to 19, or I don't know, maybe it was, I don't know, it was a cohort program, but I didn't launch until January 2023 because I was like, and it was a friend of mine that said, you need to do this, get it out of your mind and launch it. And thankfully I listened this time. So, but I totally get that. And you can see the brilliance of your creativity, honestly, with all the things you do. You have that book, The CEO's Compass. So was that, you said you love the arts, but was that something, once you kind of went out on your own and said, I'm going to create a book? What was that process like?
Yeah. So I really appreciate, Jeff, that you asking that, because I kind of fast forward, like, what did the pity party look like after I was kicked out of the nest? So the pity party lasted about 3 months through the Christmas holidays. And during that time, I was walking a lot. My kids actually talked to my husband, says, is mom okay? Because I was walking miles and miles and miles. I was listening to podcasts. One particular was called the Creative Warrior, Jeffrey Shaw, who specialized in entrepreneurship. And I just remember saying to myself, I can do that. I can do that. And so I was consuming a lot of content. I was reading a lot of content, and all this library was getting started, behind me. And I was starting to get inspired. But then at the same time, I just started going on LinkedIn. I just started writing some little short posts, and all of a sudden I was in flow. I would write something that top of mind, something about leadership, something about I'm feeling. And it was magical, like time passed, and I actually felt joy, like when I was done writing something, and people started liking it. So I realized I had this knack for writing. And then I was, wait a second, as a kid, I was a prolific writer. I'd write stories all the time. The problem was when I got to high school, I was starting to get B minuses because I didn't get exactly what I was supposed to out of the assignment or the book. So my creativity got squelched because I didn't conform to standard. So that was a big blow, but I rediscovered that writing. So anyway, I love writing. But what happened is I started speaking a little bit. I started speaking at my professional society, the American Society for Quality, and talking about my observations and what do I see needs to change in leadership. Back then, it was the 7 Ps. Performance, purpose, pride, all this stuff. And I said, somebody says, we love your stuff, Deb, but we don't know what you're about. What's your system? What's your process? So it kind of like froze me. It's like, okay, I've been doing all this writing, but it's all over the place. So that gave me pause, say, I got to write this system down. What is the system that I have? And so as I was noodling around and thinking about what do all these pieces mean, I realized that it was a compass. 7 points in my personal assessment, my intellectual property, and then true north, peace of mind. Peace of mind is the missing piece for a lot of leaders. They're always going after results, but they're really not going after peace of mind. And I can go into that a little bit later. But that was then the essence of the book. And so the book is a beautiful book. It's got a compass on the front. It's called the CEO's Compass. And it was the first opportunity. I brought all the pieces from my own experience from being in the corporate landscape of what was missing. And what did I learn that I did differently to make things like acquisitions so much more successful than what other people did? And I helped, improve the expectation with customers, and other people in the organization and corporate brought them to the knees because they didn't really listen to the customer. Anyway, fast forward, wrote the book, had to prove to myself I could actually do it. So I thought it was a one and done. And then I launched it. And then the beautiful part of it was people then understood what I was about. I was able to articulate what was unique to me, my personal thought leadership, and start putting it out into the world. And then, of course, I got interesting and got on the podcast circuit. And the thing that I tell the others about this is that if you ever have any unique thoughts while you're still in the corporate space, start writing them down, start putting them on Post-its, save them, because someday you're going to want to pull those notes and unique thoughts out and say, wait a second, this is my own intellectual property. It's worth something. It's worth a presentation. It's a speaking event. It may be a book. I think everybody's got a book in them. And so that is where I realized my creative roots. Not only could I speak, but I could write. So again, I'm a creative.
I have not read your book yet, and I know you have a second one coming next year, but we'll talk about that. But one thing you had something on your website that said, 60% of, leaders, employees suffer burnout. And I've had a couple guests, and I really love this because I experienced it myself. But they basically said, and you touch on it a little bit on your website, but like the best companies are gonna, when you leave, whether that's walking upstairs because you're remote or taking a commute, when you go back home or go into your personal mode, you have energy to be the best human being possible. Versus, I remember working at the startup days of Sprint and Aratana and Sprint PCI. I'd be exhausted. At the end of the day, I couldn't be the best husband and the best father, the best friend, the best brother, whatever role for me. And I'm like, that is such a beautiful, goal to have. Like, I want to give, when my employees leave work, whatever that looks like, that they can be the best human being possible.
No, I really love that. I'm very much aligned with that as well. This is where late in my corporate career, I was trying to figure out what my why was. And one of the things that became quite clear to me was not just doing the work and getting the results, I said, but at the end of the day, I wanted to develop the people to a point where they had the confidence, the capability, and the capacity to do great work without barriers, and that they struggle less and can enjoy more time for themselves, family, friends, and community. That was everything that I was dead center and focused on. If I can eliminate the barriers in their day to day work within the corporate environment, I've achieved a greater purpose. Yes, in the process, I've helped them with market share, satisfied customers, but I was really very human centric. And again, I accomplished that. Every one of the people that work for me, they're a success story, and I can share those stories. But leadership at the time didn't appreciate that. But when I talked about that, the people that were at the same level as me said, Deb, we love what you're thinking, we love what you're saying, and the purpose for who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. They said, we need more leaders like you. Again, so they could go home and enjoy their time with family or community or friends. My sole purpose here is to help them struggle less. That's really what was changing with me. And gosh darn it, it didn't fit in corporate anymore, but it certainly serves me now in the work that I love doing.
Yeah, and so talk about like you seem
Yeah.
to you have this drop-in CEO, you have the drop-in C-suite academy, you have the drop-in CEO media arm, the 3L media. You seem to have done it, so many different kind of uh, vertical, you know, pillars of strategy and services. Talk about how do you keep them all going and what's next for you in those
So
areas?
So this is a common theme, food. It was all about throwing spaghetti against a wall. Let's see what sticks. So, I had a purpose. First thing, your first vertical is consulting. You drop into businesses and you help them with a business issue. But I was wanted to help more people that I mean, it's on my whiteboard in front of me right now. There, I want to be able to invest in my reach. I want to help more people than I can imagine. And so you try different things as an entrepreneur. So you have the Drop In CEO Academy. I still have that training, that mastermind on my shelf, 25-minute videos with one on one coaching or mastermind type coaching for group people. It's still there. But after a while, there wasn't a market for it, or I didn't know how to market it. So it's still there for anybody that wants the C Suite Academy. We can pull that out. CEO Collective, Drop In CEO Collective. I wanted to create a space for people, professionals to come together where they didn't have a support system. Again, that's all part of my brand. Help those people so they struggle less. And we had that for about 18 months or so. But after a while, I just wasn't getting the traction. It really wasn't leading to any business development. Got a few speaking gigs out of that. And at some time, we have to realize when to shut the door and put it on a shelf. But everything is tied to what the brand is. And so, what is active now? Drop In CEO podcast, the Drop In CEO services helping C suite leaders. I'm not doing so much one on one coaching, though that is a service, but I do it as part of what I'm in. Now, let's fast forward to 3L, Media 3L. As you can see and you've acknowledged, I've written a book. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of speaking. And I realize I've been a content creation engine since the beginning. What the heck does that have to do? Maybe I should curse a little. What the hell does that have to anything to
There you
do
go.
with manufacturing and drop-in CEO services? Am I going in a different direction and diluting myself? Well, you talk about loving what you do. I love creating content. I love people valuing it. It feeds my soul. So I said to myself, I was being coached at the time. I was being coached by a brand expert, and we realized my ecosystem was the services of people that hire me, and then there's the media side of hear me, education, inspire, and maybe a percent of that hear me stuff. The media 3L company feeds into the hire me. So as we speak, Deb is getting a revamp on the Drop In CEO podcast Drop In CEO website, and we are spinning off. I bought the domain. Media 3L is becoming a separate website in the coming months. And that's where all my podcasting is going to be, all my book, all my hear me, my speaking stuff, and hopefully that exponentially grows. So everything has kind of been anchored in the Drop In CEO brand. But as I evolve, and this is the creative side, we explore and try new things and see what sticks. And the media obviously resonates. And I'm going to be going full force in that area. TV, radio, who knows?
Yeah, no, I love that. So I know we have your second book coming out in next year, 2025.
Yeah.
the new CEO playbook. So talk about that and what can readers expect?
Yeah. So I got to kick myself in the ass because I've got to get this thing written. So back in 2023, I was really keen on providing solo episodes for the struggling, aspiring C suite leaders. So 52 weeks of solo podcasts, tips and tricks that they needed to do to start the year off right, set the expectations, check in with everything they needed to do in order to achieve the greatest outcome, whether it's a promotion or a good review, etc. And I said all of those 52 episodes are going to then be distilled into the book. So basically, all the content exists. But here's the thing: as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you need to listen to some of the people to say, what should you do instead? The reason why I've been struggling with this is because I care so much about the aspiring C suite leader. They needed something, but they don't hire me. They don't hire me. I have been marketing to that demographic and they don't make the decision to invest in themselves. So, what I am doing is a slight pivot on the book. The content is the same, but I am also going to continue to write it for the C suite leader, the new CEO playbook. Stop chasing results and start pursuing peace of mind. And a big part of that is how do you develop the people under you so you can leave your legacy? Because not only do you need to pursue peace of mind and lead differently, that's why we have the CEO's compass. But then once you know how to lead differently, then the new CEO playbook, taking all that information, stop chasing results, start pursuing peace of mind, is going to be rooted in the development of those people. So it's the CEOs or the VPs of operations that make the decision to invest in their people. And then I can partner with them and be in their organization and do such work. So 2025, the new book is going to get written. It's still towards the C-suite leader. They read this book if they want to have a lasting impact versus just being a distant memory. Leave your legacy and develop the people.
Deb, I always ask at the end of our conversation the guest two questions, and I don't know if I've ever been so excited to hear the guest's answers to these two questions. So let me tee you up with the first one. The first one is, for a recent college graduate that's just getting out of college, what advice do you have for them as they navigate their first professional job search as well as starting their career?
Yeah, so this goes so against the grain after having 3 adult children and watching them in their career pursuits. This is so against what I was told to do. Jump, jump often, build your career, because the only one that really cares about your career is you. So get your first job. And if you knock it out of the ballpark, create a uber exciting app or program, and you are not in a company that has purpose, nor do you have leadership that is developing you, go on to the next one. Create your own internship. Jump, 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 move every 9 to 18 months and build those technical skills as well as understand cultures and determine what kind of leader you want to be. I am no longer an advocate for longevity. Now, longevity is good if you're in the right environment, but I would advocate for you to think about taking control of your career and don't expect anybody's going to take care of it for you.
Yeah. And I think it's harder in today's corporate world to have longevity, honestly, with all changes and acquisitions, mergers,
Oh,
buyouts.
yeah,
Uh,
and I got more. Build out a network. You think the people on the inside of the corporate environment are going to be your friends even when you move on. You're lucky if at each stop along the way, you might have one person that stays in touch with you, unless you really have a good external network and you go out and you socialize. It's a different thing. When I left corporate, I had a lot of people on the inside, but when you're on the outside, maybe doing your own thing or going to a startup, it gets really quiet and scary. Like, what happened to those relationships unless you invest in relationships? So, again, advice: invest in internal relationships, but make sure you got a social life. Join some professional societies, build out that external network, because if you have to jump or you're kicked out of the nest or exited for the first, second, or third time, you need to rely on your community. So, sorry, I gave you two answers.
That's all right. So they were both great. That second group I love to help is, while everyone could be a leader, whether you have people under you on an org chart or not, but for those people that do get promoted from an individual contributor for the first time to a manager and now responsible for a team of people, what advice would you give them as they begin their leadership journey?
Okay, so this is a loaded question, but absolutely find a mentor, find a coach, inside or external to the organization. Because again, I'm going to say it again, and I'm not being a pessimist, I'm being a realist. If you have the good fortune of having a great leader as a manager, not a manager, but a leader as a manager who spends a particular part of their time talking about career development. Now, you as an individual own it. You need to start the conversation, but you need to partner with somebody that's going to give you the guidance. I absolutely advocate that you need to own it, start the conversation, and ask open-ended questions. And I'm going to weave into one of my talking points. When you say, "Hey, boss, how am I doing?" You're going to get the four-letter word fine, Fine. And what the hell can you do with the word fine? Or you get the deflection. Let me get back to you. And then it's crickets. You don't hear anything. A quick tool. If you're lucky enough to have the right leader, yes, ask them anything and everything about what do you need to do next. But you should also give these three words and ask them very directed questions. What should I continue, start, or change? Because those then spawn a response. They have to answer you what and to be very specific. And ask them, what are you good at? What should you continue doing? What should you start doing? Which is what you leverage, and what might you change, so that you don't find all of a sudden a performance review in 12 months that they pick up something that you did 11 months ago and never gave you some feedback. You need to understand what you might want to change so you don't detract from your gifts. So, mid-career manager, find leaders, find a mentor or coach inside or outside. Take ownership of your career and ask some very direct questions versus open-ended, because you're not going to get anything and then you're never going to know how to develop as a leader. So again, school of hard knocks, I learned the hard way, but you need to ask the right questions and own the conversation.
Love that answer. That's so good. Deb, I'm so honored that you came on the Corporate Couch today. I loved the conversation, and I look forward to our next one.
Jeff, thank you again for the opportunity, and I just want to wish you well and continued success, and thank you.
I just so love talking to Deb. Her voice was just magical.
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I tell you, I know a little bit about the voiceover industry, and if she wanted to, she could make a living in voiceover and nothing but, if that's what she wanted to do. That voice is so melodious, so authoritative, so personal. I had to do as little editing to her voice as anything. A lot of times I have to do things like adjust levels and cut out false starts and uhs and ands and bud and stuff like her. I just let her run. It was amazing.
No, I said it during the conversation. I said Joe's going to love this, because I think there's one other guest, and I was referring to Doug Morse.
Yep.
And Doug, at the time I interviewed him, had not been. I mean, he's been multiple times CEO, but he hadn't done a lot of podcasts or anything like that. But Doug was really good.
I think I said the same thing about him too. Yeah. They are just a treat to edit.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm trying to make your job as easy as possible.
Well, no, my job is to make everybody else sound as good as possible. And
I know you do that every week for me.
When you start with that kind of perfection, that just makes it that much easier. But go ahead. What else did you think about, Deb?
Well, I think for me, it's so interesting. I was sensing this during the conversation, and I had met her once before via Zoom. She's in the Cincinnati area, but we have a lot of parallels in our career. We were born, essentially around the same time period. But I went to, she was from New Jersey. I was from New York. She was a biomedical engineer at RPI, which, it can't rival a Manhattan University business degree in information systems and finance. But, I got into IT. She went into manufacturing. So, it's kind of the more technical, analytical side. But we both, her podcast, The Drop-In CEO, is close to 500 episodes here, in January 2025.
and you and I got into podcasting and having, you've worked with me, 4 times now or 5 times now, 4 different companies, or 3 divisions of Sprint, I should say, in Boehringer Ingelheim. But as you know, part of my personality was make presentations creative, and that was getting my creative side out. And then you and I did the videos at Boehringer Ingelheim for the sales force, and I love that stuff. And that, for me, doing this podcast was part of that, me kind of putting out my creativity juices and having a passion for that. And Deb has done the same thing, started much earlier than I did, but her website is great, and she has this entrepreneurial spirit and getting her creativity out and things like that. But yeah, I just love her. I think she's great, and I look forward to our next conversation with her.
Yeah.
Joe, what was your take?
Well, obviously her voice is amazing, but we've already talked about that a little bit. One thing that I wrote down, kind of as a punchline that she said towards the end, where she said, "I finally realized I've been a content creation engine from the beginning." And so, in other words, remember that she said she started out in arts. She did music and theater and art and things like that as in elementary school, and she skipped 5th grade and started working toward math and science, and that's what got her into the bioengineering degree and the career in manufacturing and everything. That got her away from the arts. But then she slowly started, it really wasn't a zigzag like we've talked about, but more of an arch in her career, that she started working back toward content creation. And that's where she's landed now. She's written a book, she's got this podcast, she does speaking, and things like that. Totally, completely away from the engineering side. And I've certainly done something very similar to that. You have too. I think that it's interesting that that's a typical thing that we're going to see a lot in these podcasts that we do. We see a lot of zigzagging. We see a lot of people that move back and forth trying to find their niche and trying to figure out where they land. We see some people, though, and this is what Deb did, where she moved completely away from one part of her career and slowly, through her career, manipulated her way back into it, back into the content creation. And that was just interesting to see how that worked out in her career.
Yeah, and the other parallel I found with her in terms of how our careers were similar was she went someplace and shit happened. She got let go or whatever it was. This is not working out. And
she heard that speech several times in her career, didn't she?
Yes, I mean, so, and again, I believe God or the universe, whatever you believe in, puts you where you need to be in life. So, and the other conversation we got into early on in the episode was, the Italian, do you call it sauce or do you call it gravy? So that was nice. I got to bring up my Aunt Irma's meatball recipe and sauce, which was fantastic. So anyhow, with that type of intro, Joe, what leadership advice would you have for our great listening audience today?
We're going to that great philosopher named Stephen Wright, who one time said, "The hardness of butter is proportional to the softness of the bread."
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.